very next day they fire me. Can you believe that?
No.
That's not a coincidence. That's a sign.
Of what?
The life not lived.
So, the moment we've been waiting for has arrived at last. The final 7 episodes of the 7th season of Mad Men are upon us. And the first one, Severance, aired last night, and we're going to talk a little bit about it right now. So many things to discuss. The nostalgia trailer that they've been running was breathtaking. I got misty watching it. Seeing these characters who we've spent, so much time with since when the show began, it gets very emotional thinking about the journey that we've actually taken with them together. And so many of those key, iconic moments, characters who we've lost, who are either not on the show anymore or they've passed away in story. And very, very well done trailer. And all of this set, against Dawn's carousel pitch, which for me was the greatest moment of the show. It's strange to think about that, for me at least, they hit that creative pinnacle at the end of season 1. But only taking a little bit off that high, they have clearly kept the quality this entire time. I know some critics are thinking that maybe the show's gone on too long, but the fact of the matter is that Matt Weiner's ending it the way he wants to. He's ending it on his terms. I know that if AMC was going to pressure him into doing another season, he wasn't comfortable with it. We know he'd say no. But getting into the meat of the episode, we pick up with Dawn coaching an aspiring model, and he's being very suggestive, telling her how to, touch her leg and how to show us how soft her skin is and things like that. And you think that he's having a liaison with this woman. Of course, he and Megan are either divorced or they're in divorce proceedings. So now he can philander to his heart's content. Not that it stopped him much before. But in this context, I love the reveal that they're actually just in a casting session. And there's a whole group of people there, and he says, okay, bring in the next girl. So it's business as usual. So they're back at it. And it was interesting today, actually. I came into work, and we had a real water cooler moment about this show. This is definitely still a water cooler show. And I just went into the break room, and I was making a cup of coffee, and I ran into a friend, and we got talking about the show, and then someone overheard us and said, oh, did you see it last night? Well, what did you think of this and that? And then someone else came up, and before I knew it, there was actually 5 of us all standing in the hall talking about the episode, which isn't something that happens with very many shows. So I think that this premiere, it really feels like a season premiere, even though it's the mid-season premiere. But it really feels like, with a slight time jump, I think about 5 months have gone by, and of course Roger's mustache, and it feels like a lot longer. And it's been, almost a year in real time. So it's nice to see that, we still have these moments where people will come together and they'll talk about it. And I know a lot of the interaction I have with fans is on Twitter, but it really is nice to have that water cooler moment. So Dawn looks the same, whether it's the late 1950s or it's the early 1970s. He hasn't changed a bit. He still has the Brill cream, and he still wears the white shirt with the gray pants, and he still looks great. Doesn't look like he's aged a day. Roger, on the other hand, is now sporting a very 70s mustache, and he looks like he's really living life. They're having a late breakfast. I guess you call it an early breakfast with 3 of the models, supposedly from that casting session. And Roger's being very rude to the waitress, and he leaves her a $100 tip as a way to make good on it. And the thing that I noticed is that Dawn is never one to give in to the changing of the times. He never really changes his looks. And I like when they show him on like a day off. Back in the early seasons, they'd show him on his day off playing with Bobby and kind of being around the house, and he would actually dress more like the 60s, and he would dress more casually, and I did enjoy that. But he doesn't give in to what a lot of the younger characters do, wearing those kind of fashions around the office. He's always very professional. Whether it's 1955 or I'm assuming 1975, Don Draper will look the same. We're not going to see Don with a perm anytime soon, is basically what I'm saying. So Roger seems very happy, doesn't he? Don, not so much. Don, he's a millionaire now. I think he was before, but he has even more millions now. More money than he would know how to spend, I'm sure. And he needs a secretary just to keep track of his dating opportunities. And he's talking openly now about his poor childhood. So this is something he kept under wraps, wouldn't even share with Betty. And now he's talking about it freely. So I think he's really coming to terms with who he is, who Dick Whitman was, and who Don Draper is, which I do like to see. He's no longer hiding from his past, but I think it could be argued that he's hiding from the future. He's not really evolving or changing, and he's just more or less back to his own ways, drinking hard, and he's with different girls all the time. So when he switches on the light in his apartment, when he gets home, he just kind of looks at it. He switches on the light and he looks at it. And I think I'm feeling some of what he feels. He's picturing, Sally and Bobby playing, and whenever I see the apartment, I think of Megan singing "Zoopy Zoopy Zoo," and the place is packed with family and friends, and now it's empty. And that's how he feels. And he just looks at it, and I think he can't bear the sight of it. He just turns off the light. Reminding me a lot of the scene where the elevator doors open, and he just looks down the elevator shaft. And he's looking into the abyss of what his future could be. So at the diner, with the models draped over them, Roger, he leaves the 100, and it sets off a series of strange scenes, which is really the meat of the episode. The woman, the waitress, passes, she has more than a passing resemblance to Rachel Menken, and also Midge from the early seasons as well. Dawn definitely has a type here, and it took me a while to realize that it wasn't the same actress who played Rachel. I actually had to look that up because it had been a while since I'd seen her, and she looked so much like her. And Don keeps going back, and he says, don't I know you from somewhere? I swear I know you from somewhere. And I'm trying to think if I really want to get into this now or later, but he has a dream at one point about Rachel, and it's right before he finds out that she actually has passed away from leukemia. He learns this from his secretary because they're trying to sell Topaz pantyhose at department stores, blah, blah, blah. So he figures, well, I'll give Rachel a call. Maybe we can get Mencken department stores involved in this. And then he finds out that she's passed away. So even towards the end of the episode, I wasn't sure if it was the same actress. I wasn't positive. So I was thinking, like, either, did she lie about her death and now she's posing as a waitress? That didn't make much sense narratively. So I figured it's got to be Don hallucinating again, just like he did in the season, I think it was 5 finale, The Phantom, when he's picturing his brother and he has the toothache, and everywhere he looks he sees his brother who hanged himself. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen season 5, why would you be watching a season 7 review? So I thought he might have been hallucinating her face, and at the end when she says, death has a way of distorting things, I thought he was going to blink and then see a different actress, and then the veil would be lifted. But no, she just passed a resemblance to Rachel. She's actually, the waitress is played by Elizabeth Reeser from Twilight and from a number of other things. And it's funny, I even thought I knew her from somewhere else. The name Reeser, I thought I was looking through her IMDb trying to see like what I knew her from, because I'm not really big into Twilight. And there was nothing there, so it was strange that even I thought that she reminded me of someone, but she didn't. So he comes back and back to the diner, and she mistakenly thinks that he is trying to sort of collect on what he's owed for the $100 that wasn't even his. So they go into the alley and make some bad decisions, which was kind of surreal in and of itself. That she would do that, or that Dawn would go along with it so willingly. But that's Dawn for you, I guess. So, moving on, Peggy and Joan were wonderful in this episode. After the Burger Chef pitch, Peggy is really feeling confident. She has a certain swagger about her, and I really enjoy that. And the scene with the pigs at McCann, where they're basically just like sexually harassing Joan, and everything she says, and she's really trying to earn business. She's really trying to save Topaz, which is this big client for them, and they're just being very unhelpful. And it got really awkward because in the elevator, and I think Peggy and Joan have great elevator scenes as it stands, but Peggy basically blaming Joan, dressing a certain way, attracting this sort of attention, which it's blaming the victim. That's not fair at all. And then Joan sort of admonishing Peggy for, well, if you looked as good as I do, then you would have this problem, but you don't understand. So these two powerful, self-assured, confident women who could have sort of joined forces to stop this kind of thing actually end up at each other's throats and picking at each other, which was it was a real shame. So when Joan goes shopping and ends up buying more clothes that just accentuate her figure, it's her saying, I am who I am and I'm not going to change for these men, which I can definitely appreciate. And then when the sales clerk says, don't I recognize you? You might remember back when when she was having trouble with her husband, she ended up quitting Sterling Cooper for a while and working at the department store, and she hated it. That was a real emotional low for her. So the reminder of that, she sort of, snapped back. And the thing about Joan is she's grown for me to be one of the more interesting characters. At the end of last season, when Bob Benson sort of proposes the arrangement, and we find out that he's actually come out as gay, and he's saying, I'm supposed to have a certain image, I'm supposed to act a certain way, and then you won't have to worry, about your son not having a father, and you can do whatever you want, basically, or move to Detroit, and we'll have a mansion. And Joan says, I'd rather hold out my whole life waiting for love than give into this kind of arrangement. And so she's sticking up for the happiness that she knows that she's due and that she deserves, rather than giving in, which is another, we haven't touched on this yet, but that's a great example of the life not lived. What would her life with Bob have been? She can look into the crystal ball, see the future, and know that it's not what she wants. And for her to be able to actually make that decision for herself, I appreciate, because some of the characters on the show are too weak to make that decision. They would just give in and settle, or maybe take a darker path like Dawn does. But I really admire Joan for that. So Peggy, seizing an opportunity for her own happiness, actually takes up, I don't know his name, but her coworker on the opportunity to have a date with his brother-in-law, and it goes really well. I was proud of Peggy. It started off a little shaky, but by the end they were laughing, and he seemed to respect her, he seemed to get her. She's a confident, powerful woman. I mean, she owns an apartment building, and she's a powerful person in her field, really well-respected in her field. And he fed on that. He appreciated her for who she is, I think, and respected her decision to sort of ask him to leave at the end of the night. And I think them going to Paris right there on a whim would have been probably not great. And unfortunately, again, what would their weekend in Paris have been like? It might have been the best weekend of their life. They might have found that they were each other's soulmate. But as it stands, she passed, couldn't find her passport, which was convenient. It was at the office of all places, symbolic of perhaps her career holding her back. I don't know. And the gentleman has a job interview in D.C. in 2 weeks, so he is actually going to supposedly call her when he gets back from D.C. My guess is he gets the job and they don't see each other again. But I'd love to see Peggy happy if she can do it on her own terms and not settle and take a page from Joan's book. So we are being hit over the head with this metaphor, even when Topaz says, they want to copy the Legs sales model and put their pantyhose in like a clear topaz, like a green, clear jewel. And Dawn rightly says that's copying your competition. That's not the way to success. You've got to reinvent yourself. And he should take his own advice, because and I really love the metaphor with Topaz, because if you think about it, he's saying, don't fight to be the best at the bottom of the barrel. Elevate yourself. Become a department store brand. Make yourself better. And find success that way, which I really did appreciate. So the real meat of this episode, and the title Severance, refers to poor Ken Cosgrove, our own resident pirate. And he is given a severance package and asked to leave because of an old feud with McCann. You might remember a few seasons back when McCann bought Sterling Cooper, and then Dawn and Roger and the rest of them left to form Sterling Cooper Draper Price. That Ken actually went to work for McCann for a while. He was an account man over there. And when he left and came back to Sterling Cooper, he apparently took the bird's eye account with him, and they never forgave him for that. So now, for an old vendetta, they're going to cut the head of accounts loose, unfortunately. So Roger, very coldly, he never really cared much for Ken, says, you're going to get a generous severance, but you got to give Pete Campbell all your, we haven't even talked about Pete Campbell yet, you're going to give Pete Campbell all your accounts. So his wife the night before was basically saying, you've given your eye for this job, don't give him the rest of your life. Write, be a writer, do what makes you happy. And that's what Ken says is the heart of this entire episode. He's in the the phone booth there, right at the entrance to the office, and Don sees him and he says, how he's getting laid off. And Ken says, it's not a coincidence, it's a sign. And he's referring to the fact that the day after his wife tells him to quit and be happy, Roger lets him go and gives him a pile of money too. He could sit on that money and be a writer. He could probably get by for a year. I don't know the amount, but he could probably get by for a year and just write and really try to live out his passion. And who among us wouldn't love that opportunity to be paid to do what we really love? Those of us who have that opportunity are very lucky indeed. So Don says, of what? Meaning a sign of what? And Ken says, the life not lived. And that could have very easily been the title of this episode, The Life Not Lived. So when Ken could have chosen happiness, the life not lived, looking badass on the cover of his dust jacket of his book, and he even suggests to Pete that he could write about Madison Avenue and just write about work, and Pete says, leave it all behind. He says, write an adventure story. So he could have looked at his father-in-law, who waited too long to make this decision, and make a different decision, but he doesn't. Instead, he chooses to go back to work. He takes the job with Dow Chemical, and he's going to stick it to Roger and McCann, and basically being a really hard-to-please client. So he's going right back into it. He's not going to write. And what would his life have been like if he had gone the other way and not chosen revenge over his own happiness? So Ken, in this case, has made a bad choice, I think. Confusing episode at first. There was a lot to think about. I actually turned it off last night, and I said to myself, I don't really know what just happened. I don't know that I really liked it. But now that I'm thinking about it, I talked to some coworkers, and I talked to some friends about it. It's definitely making sense, and that thematic bridge of the life not lived, and the choices we make. When you really think about it, we were hit over the head with it for the whole hour. It just happened again and again and again. And I think that's going to be the season. It's going to be where do these characters end up, and what could have been. When Don goes to the apartment to where Rachel's family is sitting, Shiva, he looks over at the couch and he says, "Oh, those are children." And if you squint, it could be a young Sally and Bobby. And I think this works on two levels. One, he's thinking, this could have been me. I could have died, and I could have lost the chance to better myself. And two, the only person who's happy in this whole episode is the one who's dead. It's Rachel. She lived the life she wanted to, lived it her way. She had two beautiful children, and unfortunately, she got sick. But she lived life to the fullest for her, and she was happy. Something that she probably wouldn't have ever been with Don, because he's not, especially then in the early years, he wasn't emotionally ready to find that sort of happiness for himself. Happiness, it's an elusive beast. It's fickle. And you think you do what you need to do to be happy, but there's always outside forces and choices you make that if you make them in good faith can have far-reaching consequences. So, as Ken talks to Don about the life not lived, he's finally free of the agency. He can pursue his passion. Ted tried to do the same thing at the end of Waterloo. He said, "I'm out of the advertising game. I just want to be done with it." And Don, perhaps selfishly, told him that you don't know how much you need the work until you can't do it anymore. You've got to stay. This is who you are. This job, this work is who you are. And Ted comes right back into it. He grows an even bigger mustache than Roger, and he jumps right back into it with both feet. Was Don right? Was Don wrong? I think that's going to be the question that this mini-season, the second half of the season, is going to ask. Is it better to just keep working and give your life to your job, or should you let it all go and reinvent yourself? Reinvent yourself like Topaz should. We can learn a lesson from that pantyhose. So I was actually thinking back to the season 2 premiere when Don has to go to the doctor and he has an insurance physical, and the doctor says to him, the way you're living, it's you're 30, whatever he was at the time, 36. It's going to hit you all at once. You've got to take this seriously. And he says to Don, buy a boat, try to relax. But what Bert Cooper said is true. The best things in life are free. Don doesn't need to spend money to find happiness. He needs to look at himself and figure out what is really important to him. And the answer's got to be his children, I would hope. And he needs to find some happiness. He needs to find a woman, someone like Rachel. He missed an opportunity for happiness with her. He was never happy with Betty. He made a decision like Bob Benson. He wanted to have the pretty blonde wife, but he never, I don't think, really loved her. And the life he could have had with Rachel, what might it have been? Those could have been his children sitting there on the couch. Bert dancing in his stocking feet was right. The best things in life are free. And Don, I think, is slowly starting to realize that. But what is he going to do with this knowledge? That's the question for the upcoming episodes. What does Don do with it? So I just want to say one thing on a personal level. I used to really enjoy watching this show with my Nana. She lived in Florida. And we would email back and forth, and she'd say, "Oh, did you see Dawn last night?" We just called it Dawn instead of Mad Men. I'd say, "Oh, yeah." And we'd say, "What did you think of this? What did you think of that?" And we both disliked Betty very much. And she would sometimes just email me or call me and just say, "Oh, Betty." But that was a lot of fun. And when she came up to visit a few years ago, we actually watched seasons 1 through 4, and then half of season 5 because it was just starting on Blu-ray. And we watched almost one every night, and we'd have a little bit of the Canadian Club, or we'd open up a bottle of wine or champagne, and we would sit together and we'd watch it. And she'd tell me a little bit about the 60s and things like that, and what life was like back then. And it was really special. It was a special connection. So as this show's wrapping up, she won't be able to see the ending. But it's one of those things where it leaves me with happiness of the time we got to spend together watching the show. Regret that we can't watch it together now. But it just always brings me back to the end of season 1 and when Don was talking about the carousel and how it's a time machine. And it goes backwards and forwards, and it takes us to a place where we ache to go again. I'll be very sad when the show is over, but I hope we can enjoy the ride together. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.